Episode 16 of the NBA podcast. Patrick, what's up?
I'm doing pretty well. Can't complain at all. It's been a while we've had this podcast idea on our minds. It's been over several months, and with just so much going on in the league right now, we haven't really gotten time to do it. So, really happy to be doing this deep dive episode today.
Yep, and of course, what you're talking about is Light the Beam! We're finally doing our deep dive on the Kings. We were talking about this before the year started, but honestly, aren't you kind of glad we waited because of how the season has gone for them?
Really, honestly, yeah. Because before the season, I think our takes have been a little bit more pessimistic. Obviously, the
Probably
second half last year.
optimistic, but more pessimistic than what actually happened.
Yeah, I mean, just going off of like my predictions for like the standings in preseason, I had them in the play-in, so like that was kind of the optimistic part of it. I was like, oh, okay, they're gonna finally make the playoffs. But I would have never predicted where they'd be right now. As a 3 seed in the West, and arguably probably having a pretty good shot at getting up to the 2 seed. Depending on how Memphis handles this whole situation. But I mean, there was a lot of positive, momentum this offseason. I feel like, bringing somebody in like Mike Brown. Obviously, a few questions about that with his tenure in Los Angeles, then his tenure in Cleveland. His tenure in Cleveland was pretty good. The tenure in Los Angeles, which is probably why he kind of got froze out from head coaching for a while. But he's been quite with the Warriors for quite a while now, learning under Steve Kerr and such. And I think it was time for him to get a start. So there was some momentum there, and this season has just been amazing for them. And really, these past couple of weeks too. There's been a lot of notable Kings chatter. They're going to get their first TNT game soon, I believe, if I saw that correctly. Their first TNT game in like forever, which is pretty big news. And then, of course, they had that incredible game against the Clippers a couple weeks ago. One of the highest scoring games in NBA history. So,
Second of all time, and kind of zoom out a little bit with the Kings. Obviously, the big storyline is that playoff drought, 16 years. It's going to be broken because, like you said, they're heading towards the second seed. Now, Charlotte, we're going to have the longest drought, and that will go on for a while. But really, I just think of so early 2017 was really the turning point for the team. They traded DeMarcus Cousins that deadline, drafted De'Aaron Fox. Things were looking pretty promising. They in 2018 infamously drafted Bagley over Luca, and as bad as that was at the time, Bagley still at first like looked promising. It was Fox and him and Healed, and you're like, oh, that's a pretty good core. And then it just kind of wasn't working for a few years, and then that brings us to last year with the highly controversial Halliburton for Domantas Sabonis trade, which I weren't we both kind of negative on that at the time?
yeah, I mean, I think the main reason was at that time, I think there was a legitimate debate over if it was Tyrese's team for the future, if it was De'Aaron Fox's. That was honestly a legitimate debate.
It was then,
And
yeah.
since the trade, and really obviously this season in particular, De'Aaron Fox has taken his game to a whole nother level, which makes this trade not as much of an issue of losing like a future franchise point guard when you already have one. Um, there were just a lot of questions. I mean, Indiana hadn't had a whole lot of success with Sabonis, but of course, the way the Kings have surrounded him is a whole lot different than the Pacers with having him and Miles Turner play together and such.
Yeah, and I think just part of it was they chose Fox, they believed in him. Like I said, I picked this 2017 era where he came into as the starting point of this little background on the Kings. And since then, they've had four coaches, which honestly doesn't seem that abnormal for today's NBA. If you would have asked me, like, yeah, how many coaches do you think the average team has went through in the past 6 years? I would go like, yeah, probably four. You already mentioned Mike Brown was as a coach was a huge acquisition this summer, and we'll get into like some of the reasons why he's been so good. Kevin Herter was a huge acquisition. I love that trade. Malik Monk coming in with his old buddy De'Aaron Fox. He's been awesome. Then Keegan Murray as their draft pick. That's like three players and a really good coach right there that like you're starting to see where we are at now, third in the West, about to be second, 37-25, 8-2 in their last 10. They're on a 5-game win streak. You mentioned that super high scoring game. I just we're going to continue to make sense of it as we continue to break down the team, but as a starting point, doesn't that just make sense right there? It's like the Kings, because I don't know how much you enjoyed watching the Kings the past few years, but really with me, like it would be each year I was more high on them than I think I should have been. But this year, it's like you had that core and added Mike Brown, Herter, Monk, and Murray. Doesn't that just make sense? You just added a bunch of really good players.
Yeah, I think their team became a little bit better designed. I think they were just last year in particular. That what I like to talk about a little bit is kind of the transition from last year to this year and why this team has been so much better. And the acquisitions you just mentioned are a big part of it, and the coaching. But the team became a little bit more N.B.A. style. With more length on the wings in particular. Having that 3 point guard system that they had last year, with Halliburton, with De'Aaron Fox, and with Davion Mitchell, it's a good idea in practice. And of course, it's a little bit more viable with Halliburton being like a 6 point guard, so he can play the two pretty easily and the three. But this team is so much more of a seamless fit. Kevin Herter is a true 2 guard, if not even a three at times. And then Keegan Murray helps out so much on the wing to complement Harrison Barnes. So I think the team is well positioned in terms of length on the wing, which also helps cover up, what some people say is the biggest weakness of Domantas Sabonis, which I'd probably agree with, is his defense. His mobility on the perimeter and his defense, and having Murray, Barnes, and Kevin Herter on the floor, that helps him out so much. Makes his job a hell of a lot easier, which is why a big part of why the Kings have been winning this season. But the real change is, I think the spacing as well really helps. I don't think that it's not fair to say that Tyrese Halliburton is not a good 3 point shooter, because he can, but Kevin Herter is such a natural floor spacer, which helps clear up room for De'Aaron Fox to do what he does best. And then also, we can talk about Keegan Murray. We had a whole segment on him on a rookie review video, one of the last episodes we did, but he's shooting almost 42% from three on 6 attempts per game. That is a legitimate floor spacer and one of the best in the league. So that's always good to have. And it just, like I said, clears up space for De'Aaron Fox, also clears up space for Harrison Barnes too. He does. He's still a very good scorer. He's been one of the most consistent, guys to get you 15 to 20 points a night. And of course, he's shooting 37, almost 38% from three on 4.5 attempts per game. So he also is capable of spreading the floor, as well as Sabonis. Don't forget that. Most of his game obviously is built on the inside, but he also has the ability to stretch the defense a little bit. So this is a very open offense, and that's why you see the improvement. Offensive rating last year was 109.9, which was 25th in the league. This year, they're first in the league in offensive rating, 119 flat. So, that's just a huge difference from last year.
Well, yeah. So let's get into that offense. Kind of what I wanted to. You just laid out that offensive rating. I wanted to give a few numbers here. So yeah, like you said, they're first in offensive rating. They're first in true shooting percentage, which I like to look at because that if someone who doesn't know, that's like a culmination of 2 point, 3 point free throws. So that just shows you're efficient across the board, which this team will see is. And part of that is that shooting you're talking about, which by the way, 10th in 3 point shooting, 7th in free throw shooting. They're 18th in turnovers, which isn't great. They're 10th fastest pace in the league, 25th in offensive rebounding, and you could tell, like with what you were talking about with their size, that offensive rebounding isn't a focus of this team. Like, what one thing we'll see throughout this is like they're playing to their strengths, and they know it's they have a bit more size now, but they're still like a bit lankier, a bit smaller than a lot of other teams. So they don't even try to get offensive rebounds really. They're only 27th in putback frequency, so a lot of the time they'll get back. But we could save that for the defensive part of this podcast. Um, but one thing is they lead the league in transition frequency, which is like only a little above Memphis. But we think of Memphis as like their main form of offense is transition, and I bet a lot of people would also think that with the Kings, since they're such a high octane team. But you look at the numbers and it proves it. One thing that's interesting is they're dead last in the league at running a play where there's a pick and roll ball handler, but they're first in the league at handoffs. So that's kind of a preview of what we could what we're about to get into with like how Sabonis and Fox play so well together, and how Sabonis runs a lot of the offense for him. They're third in passes made, fourth in assists per game, and seventh in team assists per field goal. So a lot of their field goals are off of assists from obviously their two main stars. And I guess the first thing I really wanted to focus on is their stars, because like you would look at like De'Aaron Fox and Sabonis, right? And you kind of think of it in the same vein as like Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gobert, where it's like, yes, these are two great stars, great players, but they're kind of in a lower class than some of the other star combinations. Even so, that's perception I'm talking about. I mean, these guys have been pretty dang incredible this year. So what have you been seeing from De'Aaron Fox?
I mean, De'Aaron Fox, the thing is, if you just look at it from a general perspective, you would say, well, I mean, he's averaging 25.5 points per game, which he did 2 years ago. And then he also, his assists aren't even as high as that season. So just looking at it from the statistics, you may say, well, there's not been a whole lot of improvement. But this year, there's just been a whole lot more efficiency.
Yeah, you're right. Like the raw numbers aren't making a huge jump, but like the efficiency is shooting up.
That's the thing is, if you look at his field goal attempts from last year, he was at 18.5. This year, he's at 18.4. So there's been no increase on that. But at the same time, his field goal percentage has gone up from 47% to 51, almost 52%, so almost a 0.5% jump there. His 3-point percentage, which he's averaging 4.8 threes per game, has gone up to almost 33% from 30% last year, so marginal increases there. And I think that's something he'll continue to work on. 79% from the free throw line, which is a career high as well, which is important because, if you've ever watched De'Aaron Fox, you would know how aggressive he is, his speed and transition. I think, your point about the whole, the Kings being a transition team, as long as De'Aaron Fox is still in the prime of his career, I think that's going to be a way that Sacramento can gain advantages on other teams because of how quick he is. I mean, he may be the fastest player in the NBA. And really, the thing that helps is if you have him running a fast break, you have guys like Herter, Terrence Davis, Keegan Murray. He's got so many options to pick out, guys that will just run to the corner and be able to knock down those 3-point shots. Then you have one of the most skilled centers in terms of ball handling and being able to run the floor and such in Sabonis. It makes Fox's job super easy in transition. He has so many options. And then, of course, the option to just take it himself and drive to the rim, which is
that
where...
option right there is in large part because of what you're saying, having Herter and Murray creating that gravity as shooters, drawing people away from the rim. I mean, that's definitely a big correlation into the bump in efficiency.
Yeah, for sure. And the thing is, people will say, well, there's better point guards at shooting the three, and that'll be where he, takes his game up to another level and such. But the thing is, he's every time I watch him, he's very, very specific at finding his spots from the mid range.
Yes.
And, that's the mark of a good player. I mean, because you can say, the same thing about like Chris Paul, for example. Chris Paul is not that great of a 3-point shooter, but he's still, he knows his spots, specifically at the elbows and such. And Fox is in the same way. He knows his spots for mid range. His athleticism. He's able to pull up quite easily.
Hmm.
That's one of the hardest things to defend is when in transition he's going full speed and then he just puts on the brakes and goes up for a jumper. And I think he's this year he's been playing to his strengths a little bit more, which that's where the credit goes to Mike Brown and the system that he's implemented.
And that's
Just
a
kind of
theme
interesting.
we'll continue to see with players, what you just said.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing is, it's a little bit scary when you think about it because this is only the first year of Mike Brown and his new system being
Yeah.
implemented here, and there's already so many good, remarkable changes just in terms of style at both ends of the ball. The results, which we'll get to later, on defense haven't necessarily translated over a ton yet, but on offense, I mean, we talked about the statistics and such. It's completely translated over to being one of the best, or based off of net rating, the best offense in basketball this year.
Yeah, well, I want to stay on Fox, particularly what you were talking about with the mid range, because it's a great point and something that like went into my thinking breaking down his offense this year. Um, so he said one time in a post game interview, like, yeah, I know those are technically not good shots, but I practice those. So it's like what you were saying, like he knows his spots, he wants to get there. So, dude, he's shooting 80% for the rim this year, which is insane. But he's shooting most of his shots from 3 to 10 feet, which he's shooting 58% from. But that's those mid range, those quick mid range pull ups you're talking about. Not to just stat dump, it's just I mean the guy's having a great season. He's 10th among point guards in true shooting percentage. He was the first guard. I don't know if you saw this on Twitter. The first guard to score 30 plus points and 50% shooting in 7 straight games since Michael Jordan. And
Wow.
something that has to be mentioned is how good he's been in the clutch too. He's scoring 5.5 points per game in the clutch. This is first. And the thing is, when you look at the volume, when you're looking at the clutch scoring list, his volume is way above like everyone else that's like close to his efficiency. So basically, meaning like the only guys that are getting close to like how good he's been in the clutch are people that don't really have the play time or minutes to back that up like he does. Like the only people that are coming close to him really are Zion. He's shooting 55.3%, and then Jalen Brunson, who's been having an incredible year. He's at 50%, and we'll have to talk about the Knicks at some point soon. But I digress. It's just I guess to wrap the bow on De'Aaron Fox and to kind of transition us into his other star is like you said, the raw numbers are around the same, including in the games he plays with Sabonis. But Sabonis, just his presence and his playmaking have unlocked De'Aaron in such a way that's like super exciting, and it's always cool when we see like the rise of a guy that, frankly, a lot of people kind of gave up on. I mean, you remember during the Ben Simmons fiasco when in its initial year, like you remember the Kings were linked to Ben Simmons a lot of the time, and a lot of people were like, "Yeah, trade De'Aaron Fox." I mean, how crazy would that be now?
Yeah, it was 100% something that was being pushed by a lot of, because the idea was, Ben Simmons and his talent would be a better fit next to Halliburton, and that was why that trade idea was being proposed. Because I think, if I remember the rumors right, the Sixers really wanted Halliburton, and the Kings were more willing to part with Fox at the time. So it's obviously a blessing in disguise on both ends, not losing De'Aaron Fox and not acquiring Ben Simmons. And it's a great example of being patient as well.
Yeah.
I don't want to make this too much about the Suns, but I see a lot of similarities with De'Aaron Fox and the Kings to what Booker did with the Suns. And, I think he's starting to get his flowers now, and the team performance is really going to help people understand how good De'Aaron Fox has been this entire time. I mean, everybody knows it talent-wise, obviously. Anybody who's ever watched him, even in college at Kentucky and such, how much talent he has. But he's really, taken another step the past several years in terms of scoring, and then this year I think is the team leader. I mean, I think
That's a big one.
Even though Sabonis has obviously come over and probably added a lot of team leadership and such, and then you might look at Harrison Barnes as the elder statesman of the team, but it's De'Aaron
Yeah.
Fox's team. It's De'Aaron Fox's team undoubtedly, and first time All Star bid this year was unbelievably deserved from him. So he's having a great year.
Yeah, and then so his co-star Sabonis. I mean, a lot of time we'll call him a mini Jokic. I mean, obviously no one's gonna put up the insane efficiency advanced numbers like Jokic, but point being, he's a big man who's a amazing passer. Same, like I said, it's a theme throughout this whole team. He's got a career high in assists, career high in efficiency, all across the board, and they've found such a good way to utilize him. Like he lives in that elbow about 18 feet from the basket, right in between the 3-point line and like right at the elbow of the paint. And like the way he operates there is so interesting to watch because he'll fake you out on a jump shot, which he can knock down from that range. Even though he don't shoot much of them, he's shooting around 50% there. He'll fake handoffs. He'll do handoffs. He might put the ball on the floor and drive it right to the basket where most of his shots are coming from, and where, like usual, he's finishing at an astounding rate. Which, by the way, he's almost at 80% at the rim too. When both of your stars could shoot like that at the rim, I mean, it's no wonder that their offense has been this crazy efficient this year. And he plays off of other guys really well too. Like even like Keegan Murray, he'll do a play where he gives it right to Keegan on the left corner. Keegan will drive baseline and just dish it right back because Sabonis has leveraged his way right into the best spot right next to the basket for a good finish. What have you been seeing from Sabonis? Sorry.
Yeah, I really liked your point that you made about his positioning at the elbow in particular, because that's, I think, a reason why, this offense has been so good because, the players in the NBA that can get the ball in that position and have the ability to do multiple things, drive to the basket and draw a foul or make the basket, take the jump shot, and then also distribute the ball from that position. That's why somebody like the comparison is made to Jokic, because Jokic is very much in a similar vein. And Sabonis has been good at this for a while, but I think also he has the personnel now. It's one of those things where I can't fault Indiana for what they did, trying to make it work between him and Miles Turner, but I think you're really seeing an improvement this year. And are people understanding how valuable Sabonis is in that role when he doesn't have the issue of Miles Turner. And Miles Turner isn't a bad big in terms of running the system because, of course, he is a good floor spacer. But having it to where Sabonis is the big in the team, and then you surround him with more wings and guards instead of the system in Indiana, which was a lot more, bigger forwards and then another center alongside Sabonis. I think that's why he's just got so much more room. I mean, it seems like we're going to bring up spacing quite a lot in this podcast,
We are.
but it's for a reason. I mean, it genuinely makes a huge difference in what Sabonis is able to do when he has the ability to do those three things, drive the lane, take the jump shot, or pass. And Indiana, of course, he still had the ability to drive the lane most of the time, but now in Sacramento, he has the ability to do it as much as he would like. And, that's why his efficiency numbers are up through the roof this year, 63, almost 64% efficient field goal percentage, which is up from 60% last year and then 56% the year before. Interesting note, just for some humor, he's been averaging 18.9 points per game this season, last season, and the season before. That's a pretty insane thing to see. So, but just like I said, on your point with him operating at the elbow, centers who have the ability to do that, and they're very rare. Because even you could look at somebody like Joel Embiid, which is not, it's not to hate on Joel Embiid, but he doesn't have the ability to do that as much as somebody like Jokic and Sabonis does.
Well, and one point of yours that I wanted to highlight was the personnel thing. Like he was playing with Miles Turner and a bunch of players, but like this team, um, we mentioned it a bit, but they're just super fast, super athletic. like where they give up a lot of size, which I'm not saying they're like tiny like the Mavericks, but like I said, they're a bit lankier, a bit like even bigger guys like Herder, who's not like bad on defense, which like you said we'll get into, but it's like doesn't move as well. But on the offensive side of things, like Sabonis, like you said, his stats are so good because he's got fast, athletic, strong guys to run with and pass to. Like I was saying earlier, like they're seventh in their points being assisted on. So yeah, he's thriving with this personnel. And I guess that brings me into the rest of the personnel. Like I think a big thing we've been talking about this year is plugging in your holes, plugging in the holes of the ship. You got to use duct tape sometimes, and even though it's not ideal, it's doing the job. Like with your sons, like Landale, he got clowned on by the Hornets the other night, but he's had some good games. Well, with the Kings, they've filled in those holes very nicely, and part of that is like what we were talking about with the addition of like you add in Monk, Herder, and Murray, and that means you get to play guys that aren't as good less, and since they're playing less, they're doing better. That includes like Trey Lyles, Terrence Davis, Chimeze Metu, Davion Mitchell. These end of bench guys, they have a huge dip in the raw numbers, just like Fox. Well, it's not like Fox had a dip, but his raw numbers didn't go up. But these guys have had a dip in raw numbers, but their efficiency has gone up altogether. We mentioned how Mike Brown has been instructing them a lot better than the past coaches, it seems. Like, for example, Chimeze Metu was shooting a lot of weird, like mid range shots last year, but now he mostly shoots at the rim and he's a lot more efficient because of it. What have you been seeing from these end of bench guys that you've liked?
Yeah, just one of the things that I think is underrated in the NBA is the amount of depth you have,
Yep.
especially at the guard positions. And the thing is they are probably the deepest team in the league at guard, considering you have De'Aaron Fox and Davion Mitchell as your main ball handlers, but Kevin Herter is obviously the starter too. Malik Monk has made such a big impact on this
Hmm.
team. His ability, having shot creators is one of the biggest things. And I think unfortunately, I think you would probably agree with me. It's pretty clear that Malik Monk, even though he's great at the offensive end, his skill set is a little bit too limited to be a starting two guard in the league.
Yeah, that's
Or
why he's a
certainly,
perfect like spark plug guy.
exactly, and he's really embraced his role. I feel like the past 2 years, last year on the Lakers, he was one of the few shining spots on that team.
And he learned a
And
lot
this,
from that experience too, by the way.
yeah, 100%. And I think also, just to touch briefly on a stint with the Lakers, the ability to play with somebody like LeBron for the first time in his career, which is not, this is not a attack on the Hornets necessarily, but
It should
the
be.
ability the ability to play with somebody like LeBron, who's one of the best distributors of the basketball in the league, and then now here in Sacramento you have Sabonis and Fox, who do a good job of getting him in good positions. And the chemistry with Fox has been there, obviously, because the two played together at Kentucky in college. So this has been a connection that has already been formed in the past, which is why he's been such a good fit. And the crazy thing is like his efficiency numbers are actually down this year.
Right? I can't
So
believe he's only shooting 33% from three. Like I could not believe when I saw that. It just doesn't seem like that's how he shoots?
yeah, it is interesting, but one thing you can use, I mean, three pointers obviously is still going to be down, but at the same time, I mean, you wouldn't realize it because it's not kind of what's been spoken about him. But the thing is, he's more of a mid-range guy as well. And his 2 point percentage specifically is at 55, almost 56%, which is right in line with last year, and a huge jump from 47% in his last year in Charlotte 2 years ago. So that's a huge jump. Um, which is a benefit as well. Free throw percentage at 90%. He doesn't get to the free throw line a whole lot, 2.6 free throws attempted per game. But the thing is, having the depth and having somebody like Monk coming off your bench and giving you 14, 15 points a night allows you to take so much pressure off of Fox and Sabonis. And I mean, realistically, you wouldn't think about it because that's the thing is you would think, well, Malik Monk, he's a great third, option on this Kings team scoring wise. And the thing is, if you actually look at points per game, he's fifth on the team because people forget about how talented Harrison Barnes still is at the offensive end. And then Kevin Huerter, the starter, obviously, is also scoring. So you get those points being scored. And then you also get 7 points a game from Terrence Davis, who is somebody that I think a lot of people just forget is even on this roster because of
Mm-hmm.
the overflow of guards they have. But Terrence Davis has been a pretty solid role player now for several years. Another guy who can floor space decently, 37% from three this year, and a little bit more of a skilled defender than Malik Monk, which is one of those things. He's kind of like a halfway point between Herder and Malik Monk. Herder, of course, is a pretty solid defender, like you said, just a little bit maybe slower on the perimeter. It's kind of a matchup thing with him. But so you have so many different options at the two guard, and then of course you have Davion Mitchell, who gives you about 20 minutes a night, and during those 20 minutes, it's going to be some of the best on-ball defense in the league. And a big shout out to him because he has really increased his efficiency this year. Efficient field goal percentage last year was 47%. This year it's 53%, so a big jump. Of course, a lot of that is last year he had a lot more opportunity to take shots. The field goal attempts are down from 11 last year to 5 this year. But still, it's an important step for him to take because if he has the ability to create his own shot at the offensive end, he instantly becomes one of the more valuable players in the league because of how good he is at the defensive end. So, just talking about the role players, I just wanted to get it started with the guards because of how important, having the depth at guard is.
Well, something really important with that depth with guard that like really stuck out to me that I think's really cool is I could have gone for interesting there, but cool game. But anyway, it's really neat how like hit, lineups with Davion Mitchell and Malik Monk. You ever notice that with basketball where it's like two dudes playing together, kind of their weaknesses and strengths balance out to the point where it's like you've committed two player slots to form one really good player. So they're like backup backcourt is like Davion Mitchell and Monk. So if for any defensive liability Monk has, Davion Mitchell covers that up and vice versa on the offensive end. Like, you ever notice stuff like that?
Yeah, it is interesting. It certainly is a cool concept, as we would say. Yeah. But it is a good point because, as you said, the two, which I can't believe, they're actually both 24 years old because it seems like Monk has been in the league forever and
Yeah.
Davion Mitchell's obviously a second year player. But yeah, Davion Mitchell just allows you to do so much more with your personnel at the two and the three because of his ability to, even though he is only 6 feet tall, he has the ability to guard 1 through 3
Oh yeah.
and do a very good job at it. And, people talk about some of the best, guard defenders in the league. Drew Holiday is obviously up there. In my opinion, he's the best. Marcus Smart, Defensive Player of the Year. You even say Pat Bev is another one. But Davion Mitchell has been doing it quietly now for 2 seasons, which is really impressive for somebody who just came into the league.
Well, and another guard we didn't mention is Delly. He's here too. Matthew Dellavedova. I saw him play the other night. I was like, holy shit, he's only 32.
Impressive, yeah. It's kind of somebody who's disappeared off the face of the earth, but I mean, he's played 26 games this year. I do think, it's kind of a meme, but having somebody like him on this team is not a bad option. Somebody who
No.
has championship experience. I mean, really, when you look at it, he's probably one of the leaders on this team, if I had to guess. So having somebody like him in the locker room is not a bad option. I haven't watched him play in many years, so I couldn't say that if there was an injury crisis, he would be particularly useful. But
Well, it's like the Danny Green thing we were talking about a couple
yeah,
episodes ago, and like he had that crazy vitals where he just like had to go to the hospital because he was defending Steph so hard. That was such a great moment in NBA history. But yeah, I mean he brings that defensive mentality, like him like pumping up Davion Mitchell and the others. Yeah, but sorry, you wanted to go into front court players though.
yeah, definitely. And this is where this is where you could maybe start the criticism a little bit. And I don't think it's necessarily an issue because obviously you're not going to be able to fill all your holes in every offseason. It's difficult to do. Wing depth is really where I have the issue with this team. But I'll get started with the big men first because obviously Sabonis soaks up majority, about 34 minutes per game. So the question is, who's filling in those minutes at the five when he's not on the floor? And they have several different options that they can choose from. Rashawn Holmes is actually still on this team, but he hasn't played too much this year, some with injuries, some just other things going on. Obviously, he had some off the court issues, but if they could actually get him into conditioning and such, he is one of the best rebounders in basketball. So it's a good option to have. He gives you the rebounding of Sabonis. It's kind of interesting because, the three guys that I'm going to mention, you can kind of combine two of them and get a lot of the Sabonis traits. None of them have the passing of Sabonis, but Trey Lyles is actually decent at it. It doesn't really show in his assist, only one assist per game, but he is somebody who's a little bit more of a, distributor-minded player, and the spacing is what he provides. On three-point attempts this year, 37%. A little bit small for the position, obviously, but he's been, playing some small ball five for the Kings this year and also for Detroit. Last year as well. I mean, he's averaging 7.5 points per game, and last year averaged 10 points per game total. So he's a valuable option to have. And then Metu is the defensive-minded option. Somebody who's very mobile on the perimeter, is able to switch on to guards and do a pretty good job there. And he's also pretty efficient as well. His efficiency numbers, as we've talked about with a lot of players on this team, have jumped this year too. 60% field goal percentage and 62% efficient field goal percentage, only on 3.5 field goal attempts per game, but still just being able to have somebody who is a reliable, he can get buckets inside. And then, of course, the main reason why he plays is because of his defense. He's a perfect option for teams that go smaller at the five, or if they have some dangerous wings that you need to guard. I've actually seen the last time they played the Mavericks, he actually did quite a bit of switching onto Luka, and he held his own about as well as any center in the league would. So he's definitely the option there. So the bigs are not the concern with this team for me. I think they have enough depth at that position. Now, when it comes to the wings, that's what I was kind of alluding to. Is it's kind of a situation where your true forwards on this team are basically only Keegan Murray and Harrison Barnes. Minutes wise, they don't do too bad. Harrison Barnes, 33 minutes per game or close to it. Keegan Murray, basically at 30 minutes per game. So they do soak up a lot of.
Trey Lyles in this group, though, right?
Yeah, you could count Trey Lyles. The only thing I would say about him is he's not really as mobile as he's kind of more of a 4-5, in between that area. Probably more of a natural 4. It's just one of those things. This is more of, which we'll get to, like future aspirations and our predictions for this team with the rest of the season. Trey Lyles is somebody that I worry about in playoff basketball, being able to actually defend on the wing. As we mentioned earlier, of course, Davion Mitchell has the ability to do it as well, but he's not a natural wing. Obviously, Kevin Huerter is probably what I would say would be the best fit at small forward if one of those two other guys were to go down. So it's a bit of a concern. I do like they have some younger pieces. KZ Okpala, I have actually liked what I've seen from him when he does play. And then Kessler Edwards, he had a few games for the Nets last year, which he looked solid at times. So they just don't get the minutes, to be honest. Kessler has barely played this year, and then KZ Okpala, he's played 35 games, but 7 minutes per game. So it's just a concern. I think this team could really use somebody off the bench just to soak up some more of the minutes and be a threat from three and still have the defensive ability. But of course, it's like I said, it's one of those things. You can't fill all your holes at once. And they do have guard depth as well, like I said. Monk is somebody who has played at the 3 for them. Herter obviously does it quite a bit. And then also Terrence Davis has the ability to do it as well.
Well, since we're on the topic of lineups, I guess something I wanted to bring up, because I didn't get around to it yet, is they like a lot of teams bank on continuity, right? And this is a team that brought in a lot of new players, so they don't necessarily have continuity from last year. They kind of do, like they still have Fox and Sabonis was around, But the thing is, this year their starting lineup has played the most games together out of any lineup in the NBA. It's not even really close. It's like by like 30 games. They have a 118 offensive rating, by the way. Third most, by the way. It's the same lineup, but with Davion Mitchell instead of De'Aaron Fox. So that's something that also has to be noted. That contributes to like how good they've been. Just that continuity of playing together, really. And I don't know. We've started to talk a little defense, and like I definitely didn't want this to be like super constrictive. So like I feel like we could go ahead and move on to the defense because it feels like we've given the offense like a really good shake. So I'll just lay out some stats here, and you lead the conversation of what you've been seeing about the defense. But like we were saying, obviously their offense is just light is melting everything, but they're 26th in defensive rating, 22nd in rebounding. And I was mentioning the offensive rebounding earlier. The thing is, they're 15th in defensive rebounding. So, like I was saying, that's just a coaching choice that they're not going for offensive rebounds. And that's partly why it could be misleading that 22nd rebounding, like, oh, they're not securing the boards. Well, they're about dead middle, so they're not awful there. 29th in blocks per game, though, and that's something that you could surmise from their lineup. But just interesting to see those things, those connections in the numbers. And they're 19th in steals per game. And one other thing I'll say to point to them not like being god awful on defense is that they're first in the league at stopping opponents in the fast break. So that's kind of that athleticism and speed we were talking about earlier. But yeah, so what's the biggest thing like with those numbers, what you've seen, like what's where does the discussion of defense take you with the Kings?
I mean, I'll kind of get started with the main the stats that are kind of the lowest, and that's the steals and the rebounding. It's kind of one of those things you just have to settle with when you have Sabonis as your player at the five, specifically on the block end. I mean, he's just not a rim protector, which is fine. I mean, it's not necessarily an issue, and especially in today's NBA where you only have a handful of guys who are elite, centers still in the game. Obviously, Jokic is the main one that plays in the Western Conference, and then Embiid in the Eastern Conference. But it has shown its head a few times. I've seen DeAndre Ayton have some pretty good games against Sabonis recently, just from my eyes. So that's a bit of a concern. Rebounding, I mean, Sabonis is every year one of the best rebounders in the league in terms of numbers. And then you have the other guys chipping in: Fox 4 a game, Barnes about 5 a game, Keegan Murray about 5 a game. But you don't have that true second rebounder, which is probably what Rashawn Holmes is probably intended to be. But of course, that's been a bit of an issue, and that's probably something that they could look to do next year is find a replacement for him, somebody who's able to fill that role off the bench.
On that thought, though, why didn't this team go get Vanderbilt?
I
Do you
mean,
think it wouldn't have been? Do you think they wouldn't have liked this? Like either they just didn't have a good offer, they just wanted continuity, they didn't like the spacing. Like I feel like he would have been a great fit with Sabonis.
yeah, I do. I mean, I think Vanderbilt is one of those players that he can pretty much play anywhere, to be honest.
Yeah.
I mean, I've talked a lot about how much I wanted the Suns to acquire him, and he's been great for the Lakers since the trade deadline. That's really the player I do feel like they are missing. Is somebody who's a bit kind of a big four or somebody who can play small ball five. Obviously, Trey Lyles is kind of the guy on that team for that role, but he's not necessarily the rebounder. I mean, he's averaging about 4 rebounds a game, which for somebody of his size is kind of not great, to be quite honest. Metu is kind of in the same boat, 3 rebounds a game. So somebody like Vanderbilt would make sense. I do think one of those things is possibly roll. It's one of those things. He's not going to start for this team because you're not going to bench one of Keegan or Harrison Barnes, and then your role is off the bench. How do you fit it around him? Because with the Lakers, for example, he fits well because he can play with Anthony Davis, who's more of a jump shooter, which allows him to do his things near the rim, under the basket, getting rebounds and
Anthony
such.
Davis can't make no jump shots.
Well, I mean, yeah, but he has the aura. He's somebody who kind of just stands out and
He's got the
pretends.
injury aura.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough to really say. Like I said, I think Vanderbilt would fit with any team, so it is something that was interesting. But also, the Lakers did technically give up a first round pick in that deal. So if that was
Yeah,
kind of the asking price, I
yeah,
think the Kings look at it as they'd rather have their pick flexibility for possibly a trade for a star to go along with the two existing stars in the future, or of course to continue, drafting well, which is something we can really talk about. People obviously the Kings get rightfully kind of shit on for the Bagley pick. I mean, they've hit on Fox, they hit on Keegan Murray. You could say they hit on Davion Mitchell as well. Obviously, it's a little bit early maybe to say that, but I think it's a pretty good hit as well. So they've done a solid job drafting, even though obviously the media makes it out as a bad team because of the whole Bagley situation.
yeah. Like a big thing you were saying with the defense was Sabonis, because obviously that's going to be a big focal point since he's their center and he's like kind of undersized and can't move that well. I mean, like the thing is, he moves okay, like because that's the thing. He'll usually be coming up on the screen. Because I mean, if he drops back, he's literally he can't protect the rim at all. So the best chance they have is just for him to kind of come up on it, do the switch. He could move his feet good enough to stay on people. There are definitely examples of it that he could kind of hold his own and do his best. But basically, what I'm saying is he's not absolutely awful, but like obviously he's not great either. And Keegan Murray and Harrison Barnes, they do help and cover that up a bit. And like you said, when Metu plays, he's also a big proponent of that, is like getting into good help position and closing out really quick when someone blows an assignment. Um, I guess another a theme of this has been how Mike Brown has been teaching everyone defense really well. I know, like, there's a super popular clip of on YouTube of like Terrence Davis was what was he like in the restricted area or something, or he just like didn't get into the paint quick enough and get into position quick enough, and you could see Mike Brown just going out to the floor and go like, "Yeah, you need to be here, and you need to be here quicker, and I promise you, you'll get a charge." And that's exactly what happened, and you could just see Terrence Davis looking back at Mike Brown like, "Yo," and Mike Brown's like, "I told you," give him that look of a proud dad. So I see. We've talked about Mike Brown here and there, but I guess this has to be highlighted as how impressive it is that like the defense is like kind of what you were expecting to improve under him. Like you were kind of thinking like, yeah, this is an older style coach. He's been in cultures with good defense, so this is probably where they're gonna improve with him. Which like they kind of have, even though they're still not great. But this is all to say that like it's impressive that like someone who we think of as like a more older traditional coach still was able to put together like such a crazy offense, But I mean, it makes sense since he was with Golden State for so long. Um, but yeah, I guess besides that, it's like you were saying, Davion Mitchell is like one of the only people with super good foot speed and anticipation on the perimeter. I mean, Terrence Davis is. Honestly, what do you think of Fox's defense? I feel like he's gotten a lot better on that end. I remember watching like a Warriors game earlier this year. He was like locking up Steph Curry.
Yeah, I think it's very much matchup dependent with Fox. I think obviously his foot speed and his just general quickness and speed make it to where he has the athletic profile to do it. I think the thing he struggles with probably the most is more physical guards, just because of who he is. I mean, he's 6'3", so he has somewhat some of the length, but he is only 185 pounds. So it's one of those things he's going to get abused in switches against biggers like Luca or LeBron. Obviously, everybody will. I agree. Based on the eye test, I don't necessarily see it as bad as the analytics say it, though. I mean, that's the thing. The analytics look at it and have him as the worst, second worst defender on this team besides Malik Monk. So, which they also have Kevin Herter as a bad defender as well. So, interesting because my eye test says that Kevin Huerter is actually a pretty solid NBA
He's
defender.
stout.
Uh,
He's stout. He does get beat just because of his like limited athleticism. Sometimes just like moving his feet, moving his hips. But I mean, he's a big guy. What is he? 6'6", 6'7"? He could hold his
Six
own
seven.
out there. Damn, six
Yeah.
seven. Yeah.
So it's interesting. It's one of those things where I think the question is obviously team continuity is a big thing, but you do have a thing where you could look and say, well, maybe this team would be better if we could, flip Terrence Davis and go get somebody at the wing, like a young wing who has the ability to guard, both the three and the four, or just another guy like somebody like Josh Hart could be interesting. Obviously, he's probably off the market for a while now, but an option like that, or even this offseason acquiring somebody like Jeremy Grant, who's more of a four, to kind of be the guy who I guess supplements Harrison Barnes at the wing position, and then you have Keegan coming off the bench, which would be a really scary thing for the league. Um, or of course you could play big and put Keegan at the two if you wanted to do that. I just think they're missing about a wing, maybe a second one, just to really have the opportunity to match up better with some of the teams like the Clippers or um, even the Suns now with their with Kevin Durant and such on the wing. But I think a team like the Warriors is actually a solid matchup for them because they have guys that can cover the smaller guards such as Steph Curry. Davion Mitchell is really the main proponent of that, but also somebody like De'Aaron Fox, his athleticism could give somebody like Curry some trouble. As much trouble as you can actually give Steph Curry. So, but it's one of those things which we'll get on to like playoff matchups and stuff. But I think it's very much their
Well,
defensive
let's get on
profile.
to it. Do it.
Yeah, I mean, so the seeding at the moment, that's really a huge thing in the West because all these teams are actually so close to each other. Nuggets obviously have the first seed pretty much wrapped up. Then you have the Grizzlies at 2, and the Kings are only a game behind them. And that's really probably the best case scenario for the Kings. And especially, we're not going to talk too much on the Memphis situation, but with Brandon Clark, unfortunately, out for
Ah,
the year now, which is so gutting. And then Bob Morant is looking at other career aspirations. So um, the Kings have a real opportunity as only being a game back, and also winning 5 games in a row now. They're 8-2 in their last 10 to really jump the Grizzlies and get that 2 seed. And that would be huge for them because it means they look more at the crop of play-in teams. Now it still could be scary. Timberwolves obviously been playing a little bit better recently. You have the Clippers, who I'm personally scared of just because of
I'm out.
their I'm scared of them just because of Kawhi and PG, but based on the eye test and the way they've been performing recently, and also the fact the Kings have a pretty good record against them this year, that's a good sign. Then you have the Jazz, who before the trade deadline, yes, now I wouldn't be typically that scared of them. And then the Pelicans, which could be scary if Zion comes back, but that's probably the most unlikely thing. Pelicans can be a scary team, but that would be a fun matchup. And of course, you have the Lakers, kind of the last team. I'd probably say that are in contention for it, which could be scary as well. But I think the Kings' youth would actually really cause a struggle for the Lakers trying to keep up in the fast break. But so looking at that, that's the matchups at the 2 seed. I think probably the Jazz would probably be the best option for them to pull out of the play-in bracket just because of their current roster after the trade deadline. Then you're looking at the Clippers, Pelicans, Timberwolves. The question is, if they don't get the 2 seed and they're at the 3 seed, their matchups probably range. The Timberwolves and the Clippers are still in contention for that 6 seed, which would be what they match up against. But you're probably looking at the Mavericks, maybe the Warriors if the Warriors go on a losing run. When it comes to the
A
Mavericks,
lot of what you're saying about the standings, though, I mean, dude, like all this could look completely different because these are only like 1 game separations here.
yeah,
Like
I
in
think
this
I think
range.
for me in the West, I think the top 8 are kind of going to stick as the top 8, and then it's under that the last 2 playing spots will be interesting to see how that develops.
Yeah, that's
I have,
true. Yeah.
that's just kind of what I see. I see a clear drop off from the top 8, or
Yeah, I see what
specifically
you mean.
from like 7. I see 7 and 8 with the Timberwolves and the Clippers being much more well positioned than the Jazz and the Pelicans at the moment. Um, for what I look in, because my Suns are obviously in this situation as well, is really 3 through 6. Kings, Suns, Warriors, Mavericks. Those are all teams that, the Suns and the Mavericks obviously have made some pretty big shakeups. And the Warriors are defending champions. And, once they get Steph Curry back, they're probably, they're a scary thought, even though they haven't necessarily, obviously they haven't been as good as last year, but the Warriors are still a scary team to think about playing. I think the Kings would rather avoid that. So I don't know. It's just going to be interesting, but I think they'd be best positioned to put a little bit, keep on putting the effort in the regular season. Don't start resting players after you clinch a playoff berth to try and secure that 2 seed to give them one of the play-in teams.
Why do I feel as like coming from someone who said he was out on the Mavericks, but I feel like if I'm looking at that like 5 to 8 range, Mavericks almost scare me for them, just because this is why they're both teams that just want to score a lot, and the Kings are definitely better than them on defense. But if you're sitting there just getting into a scoring match, I don't really like that against Luka and Kyrie. Timberwolves, I feel like they could get it. I don't want to say easy because I know the Timberwolves are super talented, but I would feel pretty good about the Kings. Let's just say that. The Clippers, you always got the threat of Kawhi and PG. That's true, but I don't. They're just such a weird culmination of players that haven't had nearly that continuity we were talking about earlier. Warriors, yeah, Warriors is like you said, that'd be a scary one right there. I don't know though. Like I don't feel terrible about this team being a second round team.
Yeah, I think like I said, matchup wise, honestly, just based off of size and personnel, I think the Warriors is probably the best athletic matchup in terms of I think they'd give them some trouble with their athleticism and also, having Sabonis in the middle against a smaller team. But you don't want to play the Warriors, to be honest. And that's just
Yeah.
something in that Mavericks series that would be interesting is, how much would Sabonis be able to do on the offensive end against guys like Dwight Powell and JaVale McGee and such? You would
A
think
lot.
that would be their focal point on offense, would be to get him more involved, which is, that's really the Mavericks' weakness. The wing defenders is also an issue, which would help in the case of De'Aaron Fox and even the other guys too. But really, they could dominate on the inside. They wouldn't have that option with the Timberwolves, but like you said, I don't think any of the best teams in the West are too scared of the Timberwolves just because it's kind of like the Clippers. There's a lot going on there, and then injuries are playing a part with them too. Clippers are just scary to me, just because of the amount of wings and stuff. I think they're really a playoff built team, and so if things are all clicking, but there's, like you said, there's so much drama going on there, and then of course Westbrook's now on the team. He had a good game last night with their loss to the Kings, but you still have, like I said, the threat of Kawhi and PG, and that's where you get a little bit worried is if those guys are hitting, how are Harrison Barnes and Keegan Murray going to be able to stop them at the defensive end? So it's a bit of a question. I would probably say
We could have Westbrook have the ball and not pass it to Paul George and Kawhi, apparently.
Yeah, that's probably what you said, but also you look at it and you say, well, Kevin Huerter is probably going to be the guy guarding Westbrook or De'Aaron Fox, and obviously Westbrook's having issues, but he still can turn it on for a night like he did last night,
Yeah.
and he might be able to do that more often against a team like the Kings, who probably don't have the defensive personnel, at least in the starting lineup. The one thing I will say about the Clippers, I feel like they don't use the switches as much as other teams do, and the Mavericks in particular are really good at that, getting Luka and Kyrie on either the bigs or guys that they're trying to abuse, or the smaller guys, point guards, which that would be the concern, would be Luka switching onto De'Aaron Fox pretty regularly, or even Sabonis. Kyrie onto Sabonis is probably the preferred matchup in terms of how to expose him. So I think it's one of those things for the Kings. You're wanting to get the 2 seed. If you don't, that's fine. They're pretty much locked in. I would say either the 2 or the 3 seed, unless they have a pretty big collapse here down the stretch. It's your first playoff series in so long. You're going to be excited for it. the fans in Sacramento have waited way too long for this. It's going to be an insane atmosphere for that first game in a couple months.
It's gonna be must watch. Man, the more you start talking about that Mavericks one, that might be the one that intrigues me the most. That might be the one I would want to see the most because I would be very interested to see just like how, like, because we were saying how good Fox and Sabonis have been this year, but like I said, they have a perception like Mitchell and Gobert did, fair or not, that they're like a lower tier of star, even though the numbers say they've been really incredible this season. But it is Luka and Kyrie. But then, like we were saying in the defensive portion, the Kings do have some silver linings on defense that the Mavericks absolutely do not have. So that would be a really interesting matchup to me. Is that, would that be your favorite one, or which one do you want to see the most, just matchup wise?
So if you asked me 2 weeks ago, I was kind of saying King Suns would be like so much fun to watch, but I just don't think
Yeah,
that's really going to happen. I mean, I do like the idea if they end up getting that 2 seed, like a Kings Pelicans matchup with a healthy Zion. I think that would be a lot of fun.
yeah,
But I don't think that's really going to happen. And the way I look at it is, I think the matchup with the Mavericks would probably be the most interesting, and then that would allow the Warriors to match up with either the Suns or the Grizzlies. I think the Warriors matching up with the Grizzlies would probably be the funnest matchup, just for a rematch of last year. And obviously the team's got a little bit of beef going in between them. So I think that would be fun, having Grizzlies, Warriors, Kings, Mavericks, and then somehow the Suns luck out and get somebody else, Timberwolves or something. Definitely no bias in that.
you just
My
like
watch.
randomly fucking calculating Sun stuff in the middle of the Kings podcast.
It's been a discussion. I think Warriors or Mavericks would be the funnest matchups to give you like a true answer. And it's tough. It's tough to say that because I think I could like watch. I could just wheel spin on possible playoff matchups for hours and stuff.
Yeah,
So I'll just go with you
obviously.
and say them. I'll just go with you and say the Mavericks because I think you see the most stable team in the league this year. How about that? Our team, with like we said, the lineup continuity and stuff versus a team who's got a lot of lineup switches, a lot of moves at the deadline and such. So I think that would be a good
Yeah,
storyline.
that's what I'm saying. I like all the little elements going with that one. So yeah, I guess that brings us to our conclusion. The future of the Kings, which still looks pretty bright after this year. Obviously it's the NBA. You never know what could happen. The West keeps getting better and better. But like you said, this is only like the first full year of this, of Mike Brown and Fox and Sabonis gelling and these greater depth pieces they've added. I mean, they could get even better than they've been, and maybe next year Fox doesn't just see a huge jump in this advanced stats, but he goes from 25 to like how some of these dudes are putting up near 30 a game. Maybe he could be one of the guys that makes those jumps with the extra experience. What one thing we might have brought it up, but they have like all their picks going for besides next year, which is what they traded in the Kayvon Herter trade, as they like to call him in the locker room. So that they definitely have a path to get a star if one becomes available, and that kind of excites me to think of like another star alongside Fox and Sabonis.
Yeah, I think the discussion we kind of had is about a wing, and one of the natural trade partners I could see is it doesn't really organize or based on the assets the Kings have to trade, it probably doesn't align with the Raptors and their philosophy on wings. But I would say trading some of that guard depth and a possible swoop for Siakam or OG, I think that would be something that would be really intriguing. Give you that depth, or have someone like a Siakam Sabonis
That would
combination
be
would be really
so
interesting.
fun having Siakam, Sabonis, and Fox. What, dude? I would love that.
Yeah, the pressure on the rim that team would generate would be pretty damn special. But even, go for somebody who's probably not considered a star, but based on his ability to defensive end, I consider him a very valuable player like OG. That could be, an acquisition that could help push them to the next level.
Yeah.
Having another lockdown defender to go along with Davion Mitchell.
Well, shoot. This was good. This was really good. Our first, like, we've gone in depth with teams before, obviously, but the first dedicated in depth breakdown. I feel like we covered a lot of bases here. And to anyone who actually listened through the whole thing, you probably learned a lot about the Kings, I would say. What say you, Patrick?
I think definitely. I think it's one of the things that's really going to be fun, or it could also be bad depending on how N.B.A. Reddit in particular looks at the Kings. But the opportunity for people to actually learn about them, because I feel like, like we talked about, they don't really get national TV games, unfortunately. So the ability to watch them in the playoffs, and then obviously next year after having a good season, you would think they'd be able to get a little bit more national TV coverage. I think people are really going to start waking up to, they're not third by some fluke. This is not like, I don't think it's going to be a one-time season thing. I think the Kings are set up to be one of the top 4 to 5 seeds in the West for several years based on this team and, how it's still a young team that will continue to grow with a new coach.
And the light the beam thing is just incredible, man.
Yes.
It's just incredible. We didn't play it up enough this podcast, honestly, because that was like part of what was so awesome about the start of this year on their big win streak. Light the beam. You couldn't hear, no one could hear the player interviews because everyone's screaming, light the beam. And you just love to see that in sports, especially for like such a tortured fan base that finally gets to see such an awesome and not just it's like the Nets with Katie and Kyrie and stuff. They were really good, but they were kind of miserable to watch. But the Kings are like super fun to watch, and like I saw like how someone was like in Sacramento and they woke up from a nap and they're like, "Oh, the Kings win," and instead of looking at their phone, they just look out the window and like 3 miles away, a purple beam is shining in the sky. It's incredible, man. I'm just super happy. But as a matter of fact, I went to a concert a few months ago, and the drummer, they said he was from Sacramento, and I just like after the show, I just told my dad, I was like, "Good for him," you know.
Yeah.
I'm just
100%.
happy for. Maybe one day, Charlotte will get a renaissance, but I'm not gonna start talking about Charlotte. I'm not going to start talking. Anyway, any closing thoughts here, Patrick?
No, I mean, not really. I've really enjoyed, some of the preparation for this video in particular, as it's given me the opportunity to also watch more of the Kings as well. But, just in general, one of the teams that has a bright future doesn't necessarily have the young superstar, like a Bankero or even like a Cade or somebody like that. Doesn't have that kind of excitement. It's a team that's grown with their guy De'Aaron Fox, and have acquired a second guy to go with them, and they're just going to be fun to watch those duo, and ideally probably add a third guy in the coming years. So a bright future for this team as well, and love the culture in particular. That's the important thing, the culture of this franchise, which wasn't a good thing for a long time. It's very happy. I'm happy to see them be a positive culture team these days.
Such great points, great culture, and maybe the most prevalent theme through this whole thing is not to judge trades right away. Because a lot of people were saying, but that Sabonis trade, hey guys, Sabonis ain't nothing. It's like people don't know about Sabonis, Like I had a friend who's like, yeah, Sabonis and Davis Bertans, they're like the same player, right? And I'm like, dude, what are you talking about? So
Hmm.
it's like, yeah. Well, people know now how good that guy is. But yeah, anyway, I'm gonna keep rambling on. It was fun, lots of fun. I, like you said, had fun prepping for this, and we will see y'all on the next one. Peace.